Okay, so I think we're ready to start. Okay, so good evening, everybody. Finally, a bit of an ordeal to get this thing set up. Okay, so I'll just do one time the salutation. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened One. Okay, so now we are continuing our reading of the Mangala Sutta, or the blessings of the Mangala Sutta. Okay, now we come to verse 7, and I give the title Personal Ethics, and we have here Arati virati papa majjapana cha sanyamo apamadocha dhamesu etang mangalam uttamang. So first we deal with
minimize this. Come over here and minimize it. The left, yeah, this one. Now you can make this bigger.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that's too big. Okay, so first, under personal ethics, we have two closely related words. One is arati papa, the other is virati papa. So arati papa, we translate to cease or desist from evil, from bad deeds. And then virati papa, to abstain from evil or from bad deeds. And the two words, arati and virati, seem very similar in meaning, but here we have the classical commentary to the Mangala Sutta, which says that desisting from evil is not delighting in evil with the mind when one has seen the danger in it, while abstaining from evil is abstaining from it by way of body and speech. Then the commentary explains, so this is an interesting point, that there are three kinds of abstinence, or three aspects to abstinence. So one is called abstinence in an encounter, the second is abstinence by undertaking precepts, and the third is abstinence by eradication. And so, abstinence in an encounter, according to the commentary, is abstinence from a situation that you encounter when you reflect, for example, you reflect on your own social class, family, or clan, and consider it's not suitable for me to commit this kind of transgression, to kill, to steal, to commit sexual misconduct, to lie, or whatever. And the way I understand this, that this is a kind of spontaneous or natural tendency to refrain from moral transgressions based on one's upbringing, one's education, one's internal sense of self-respect, or a kind of intuitive sense of what is right and what is wrong. So it's a kind of natural tendency to abstain. When you meet the opportunity for some transgression, you abstain because of maybe this intuitive moral sense, or the training and education and upbringing that you've had. The second is the abstinence by undertaking precepts. And this occurs when you undertake the training rules. And so from the time this occurs, then one doesn't commit any of these transgressions of the precepts. So this means like you formally undertake the precepts, and in this way you sort of plant a commitment in the mind to adhere to this this code of ethical conduct. So when you encounter maybe a tempting occasion to commit a transgression, you recall that I have undertaken this precept, and so you refrain from the transgression out of respect for the precepts that you've undertaken. And probably, I'll have to say, frankly, when you undertake precepts, you don't have to expect to be perfect in the observance, but you make the attempt to adhere as diligently, as scrupulously as possible to the precepts that you undertake. And the third type of abstinence is called abstinence by eradication, and that is what happens when one attains it's called the noble path, or the world transcending path, which eradicates even the subtle defilements out of which transgression can arise. So from that time, the commentary says, one cannot break the 5 precepts. So the kind of abstinence that we're usually concerned with within the Buddhist framework, moral framework, is abstinence by undertaking precepts. And this would be at the most elementary level, the basic level, the fundamental level, formally undertaking and accepting the 5 precepts to abstain from killing, from stealing, from sexual misconduct, from false speech or lying, and from the use of intoxicants. And this raises a certain interesting question that earlier, in one of the earlier verses, we had vinayocha susikito, that is training well in a code of discipline. Then under dhammacharya, conduct that accords with the Dhamma, the commentary explains as following the 10 courses of wholesome action. So why should desisting from evil, abstaining from evil, come here and then interpret this as undertaking the 5 precepts? And this is my own interpretation. If you look at it superficially, it looks redundant, but this is the way I understand it. In the earlier verses, one is undertaking basically the same code of discipline, but one is undertaking it, let us say, from a mundane perspective, to become an ethical member of society, to follow a course of action that is in accordance with the worldly Dhamma of good conduct, the types of good conduct that are expected of a respectable, upright, person of moral integrity, living in the world, trying to follow a decent way of life, to contribute to society. Whereas at this point now, we are moving towards, and that the undertaking of those types of ethical principles can be expected of anybody of any kind of religious conviction, spiritual path, or even just a good person committed to a purely secular ethics, without being undertaking this moral training as part of a spiritual path leading to the distinctive Buddhist goal. Whereas with this verse, the way I interpret it, here we are entering through the door of the Buddha's teaching, undertaking the precepts as part of the beginning stage in the training that's going to culminate in the final goal of liberation. So now one formally undertakes the 5 precepts, or even more stringent codes of discipline. For example, one could undertake the 8 Uposatha precepts, which is the precepts undertaken by many Buddhist lay people on the full moon day, new moon and full moon days, but you could take them like even once a month. If you have to work on the full moon day and it's difficult to observe, you could do it like on a weekend, Saturday or Sunday. So it's basically, we have the 5 precepts, except that the 3rd precept becomes complete abstinence from sexual activity. So one is observing brahmacharya, the precept of celibacy. And then the 6th is not to eat after midday. You can have liquids, and certain kinds of what they call allowables, like dark chocolate, cheese, some other substances, but not eating a regular meal. Okay, not using cosmetics, perfumes, fragrances, ointments, and so on, and not enjoying secular, worldly types of entertainment, singing, dancing, instrumental music, and plays. And then not sleeping on a high or luxurious bed. Though I'd say that the normal beds that Americans use won't count as high and luxurious bed. In ancient India, wealthy people and kings and princes and wealthy businessmen would have extremely luxurious beds. But the ordinary American bed is just a device, a piece of furniture for sleeping. So it doesn't have to, you don't have to be concerned about the measurement from the floor, but just use it for the purpose of sleeping. Okay, then in the Code of 5 Precepts, we have abstaining from the use of intoxicants. Sura Merya, that's wine, liquor, wine, and other intoxicants. But the verse singles out, maybe for special emphasis, Majjapana cha Sanyamo, refraining from intoxicating drinks. And then there's a sutta, this is that same sutta in the Digha Nikaya with the 6 directions, which speaks about the 6 negative consequences of indulging in intoxicants. It leads to loss of wealth, increase of quarrels, becoming susceptible to disease, earning an evil reputation, shameless exposure of the body, and the weakening of the intellect. And then out of curiosity, some time ago I did a Google search, to find out from a contemporary medical point of view, what are the negative consequences of, let's say, the abusive use of alcohol. And I don't want to, criticize people who have occasionally like a glass of wine with their meal, but this is people who are habitual drinkers. So some of the consequences of excessive use of alcohol, unintentional injuries such as automobile crashes, falls, burns, drowning, intentional injuries such as gun violence, sexual assault, domestic violence, on-the-job injuries, family problems, broken relationships, alcohol poisoning. Then here we have, the Buddha just mentions simply susceptibility to disease, but modern medicine has spelled out some of the various illnesses that come from abusive reliance on alcohol. High blood pressure, stroke, heart-related diseases, liver disease, nerve damage, sexual problems, permanent damage to the brain. Remember, we have here weakening of intellect. So that could come from damage to the brain. Yeah, this was my source, Drug-Free World, Drug Facts, Alcohol, Short-Term and Long-Term Effects. Okay, then the next Mangala that we have in this verse, Appamado cha Dhammesu. That is, appamado means heedfulness, and then Dhammesu is simply in regard to Dhammas, but this has to be understood as wholesome Dhammas, wholesome practices. And so then for the meaning of, this is a very important concept that the Buddha has emphasized again and again, appamado. We have in the Dhammapada, I believe it's chapter 2, a whole chapter of verses on appamado. Did I have a quotation here? I don't think I quoted it, but the Buddha says, heedlessness is the path to death. heedfulness is the path to the deathless. Those who are heedful do not die. Of course, they die physically, but they don't die in the sense of falling away from wholesome qualities, whereas those who are heedless are already dead, even while physically they're alive. And so we have here, this is the commentarial definition, what is meant by heedfulness. It's working carefully, working consistently, working persistently for the development of wholesome qualities, doing one's duty, not relinquishing desire, not relinquishing the task, and so on. Yeah, I took some of those verses from the Dhammapada, but first there's another saying. The Buddha uses a simile. He says, just as the footprints of all living beings that walk can fit into the footprint of the elephant, and so the elephant's footprint is the chief with respect to size, so whatever wholesome states there are, they are all rooted in heedfulness, converge upon heedfulness, and heedfulness is declared to be the chief among them. And then I took some verses from the Dhammapada. By effort and heedfulness, discipline and self-mastery, the wise person should create for themselves an island that no flood can overwhelm. The foolish and ignorant indulge in heedlessness, but the wise one keeps heedfulness as the best treasure. Do not give way to heedlessness, do not indulge in worldly pleasures. Only the heedful and meditative attain great happiness. And then the Buddha's last words are that all conditioned things are subject to vanish, to perish. And then he says, Appamadena sampadeta. Appamadena means through heedfulness, sampadeta, attain the goal, attain the achievement, the highest achievement. And sort of reflecting, like, what is involved in heedfulness, this quality of heedfulness. The way I understand it, it combines various qualities. Sometimes I've seen some explain heedfulness as simply as mindfulness, constantly maintaining mindfulness, but I think that's too narrow. Certainly mindfulness is a key ingredient in heedfulness, but it goes together with virya, that is energy or vigor, that is energetically applying oneself to the cultivation of wholesome qualities. And of course, mindfulness is what helps one to maintain and sustain the wholesome qualities. Also in heedfulness will be these two qualities called in Pali hiri and ottappa. Hiri is often translated as the sense of moral shame, but this is what I call the inner sense of self-respect that induces you to avoid any kind of transgression and to keep to the path of goodness in order to maintain the sense of one's own inner dignity. And then its counterpart is called ottappa, which could be translated as moral dread or fear of wrongdoing. So this is that quality that keeps one on the right track from fear of the consequences of heedlessness or moral transgression. And so the consequences would be criticism and blame from other people that you respect, legal consequences, and then the negative karmic consequences of transgression. So you combine mindfulness and also a certain degree of wisdom or discernment would go into heedfulness, the ability to distinguish what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what is good and worthy, what is unworthy, harmful and useless. So we have mindfulness, discernment, energy, moral shame or the sense of inner dignity, and moral dread, fear of the consequences. So I see heedfulness to be a kind of composite quality involving, or composite factor involving those 5 qualities merged together. And then I took a sutta which the Buddha lays down and puts a lot of stress on, 5 reflections to inspire heedfulness. So he says that there are 5 themes that should often be reflected upon by a woman or a man, by a householder or monastic. So what are the 5? So one should often reflect. I don't want, people should don't get depressed, be cheerful. Okay. I am subject to old age. I'm not exempt from old age. I am subject to illness, not exempt from illness. I am subject to death, not exempt from death. Especially those 3 reflections, because when people are young, full of vitality, they lose sight of the fact that they're going to grow old, and then they just indulge in the pleasures that tempt young people. And similarly, when you're in the prime of health, then you lose sight of the fact that as long as we live, we're subject to illness, sometimes serious illness, which can come quite suddenly. Just during this break, I just saw a news article in The Guardian that there's some singer, I don't even remember his name, but he was on the stage in Connecticut, close by here, maybe a somewhat famous, not the most famous singer, because I don't know his name, but he was just singing on the stage, then he suddenly dropped dead of a heart failure at the age of 53, I think. So we just never know when illness is going to strike and when death is going to strike. So we always have to be aware of that fact. And then the 4th reflection is that I must be parted and separated from everyone and everything dear and agreeable to me. And this is extremely a valuable reflection when we consider, our close relations and friends. And if we're not aware that parting and separation are inevitable, then when that parting takes place, either because the loved one goes off on their own way, the relationship gets broken, or when death strikes and you lose the loved one, then you get brokenhearted and just overwhelmed by grief, and you don't know how to deal with it. Of course, when there's a death of a loved one takes place, it's quite natural to feel grief. And so what I say, there's this ideal sometimes amongst Buddhists that when a loved one dies, you shouldn't have any sorrow at all. Just bear it like a mountain of stone that can't be shaken by the wind. But I think that can lead to an unhealthy point of view. What I say is when you lose a loved one, experience the grief and sorrow, but do it mindfully and with wisdom. Know that this is part of the truths of life, the inevitable truths of life. We have to lose our parents, sometimes sadly children, sometimes a husband, a wife, brother, sister, friends. And you experience the grief, but then you reflect, that's what the Buddha said. Parting and separation is inevitable. And then the 5th is reflecting on the ownership of karma. And this is what induces one to be careful of what kind of actions one undertakes, because you can hide. The news reporters won't find out. You don't have to broadcast anything on the internet so that snoopers won't find out any transgressions, but when you commit transgressions, the karma remains imprinted on the mind stream, and when the conditions are appropriate in this life or future life, the karma will bring its fruits. It's a long passage, so we don't have to go through the whole thing. Let's see what the time is like for this session. Yeah, I could go a little bit further. Okay, so now with this verse, we've established sort of the foundation in personal ethics. But now with the next two verses, we're concerned with cultivating what I call cultivating inner virtues and wisdom. So maybe I'll just take a couple of these today, and then we'll continue with the rest tomorrow, because I want to leave some time for questions. So we have, and it's interesting that this verse begins with garavo cha nivato cha, that is reverence or veneration or respect, and its counterpart is humility. Because when we're entering the spiritual path, the path of Dhamma, aiming for the supreme goal, we have to have reverence. Reverence is what opens up the heart, the mind, and makes it receptive to the teachings and receptive to all of the positive influences that are coming down from the teaching. And so the Buddha, in some of the suttas, he speaks about, here I have 7 objects of reverence. Reverence for the teacher with a capital T, that is the Buddha himself. Reverence for the Dhamma and for the Sangha, and this would be the Aryan Sangha, the community of noble ones, not necessarily a monastic community. People can have all sorts of shortcomings and faults, but you have the reverence for the ideal of the Sangha. Then reverence for the training, so this is the course of training that we're going to be undertaking. And then part of the training, but it seems singled out, is reverence for samadhi, concentration. So here it seems the Buddha is giving special emphasis to the cultivation of the mind through samadhi. Reverence for heedfulness, which we just reviewed. And then interestingly, he has reverence for hospitality. And here he's speaking to the monks, and this is sort of a critical factor in monastic life, that when one has a monastery and visiting monastics come, there are like guidelines for showing them proper hospitality. Usually we set up a nice room for a visiting monastic. We always put out on the table maybe a towel, a box of toothpaste, toothbrush, razor, bar of soap, even though we expect the visitor to have those things, but it's considered sort of appropriate to put those things out. We might put a box of tea bags, a cup for preparing tea, maybe a hot water boiler for them to make some tea. So one is supposed to have reverence for hospitality. And it's also good to to incorporate that into household life when you have guests, to know how to treat visitors appropriately. Of course, sometimes you get visitors you don't want them to stay too long. Okay, but reverence is this important quality involving respect, looking up towards the ideal, towards the spiritual ideal. Especially we look with veneration towards the Buddha as being our teacher, and the Dhamma as being that teaching that the Buddha has revealed. And even there's an interesting sutta, I think it's in the Samyutta Nikaya. After his enlightenment, the Buddha was thinking that it's a good thing to have something to respect, something to show reverence to. And so I should show reverence to somebody who's superior to me with regard to good conduct, with regard to samadhi, with regard to wisdom, with regard to liberation. And so he starts using his supervision to sort of scan the world to see who he might revere, respect, and depend on. But he doesn't see anybody superior to himself with regard to those qualities. But he says, I still have to dwell revering something. So let me revere the Dhamma that I have realized and attained. And so the Buddha says that from now on, I dwell revering the Dhamma, respecting the Dhamma, esteeming the Dhamma, since that has been the foundation for my own realization. Okay, so and then within the context of, well, this would be in the context of, say, Buddhist communal life, other objects of reverence would be one's preceptor, spiritual teachers, any teachers that you learn from or that you might learn from, parents, elders of the family, and then also symbols representing the triple gem. So we have stupas, maybe in this country now there are some stupas. The stupa is a kind of memorial mound, also called chaitya, and in Sri Lanka called dagabas. Maybe you've seen images of them, and often they enshrine the relics, sometimes the relics of the Buddha, or relics of arahats, or relics of saintly monks or nuns, or other sacred objects. Sometimes they'll enshrine beautifully printed scriptures, sometimes engraved with jewels and gold. So one reveres the stupas, images, and then also along with the stupas, we should say the Bodhi tree. We recite this verse, Vandami Chaitiyang Sabbang Sabbatanesu Patititang Saririka Dhatu. Those are the relics, the bodily relics of the Buddha. In Sri Lanka, we have the tooth relic, in other countries, other relics. And then even images and statues of the Buddha, and sacred books containing the Buddha's teachings. So we have a kind of convention that you have a novel, maybe a romance novel, detective novel, you don't put it on top of your copy of the middle-length discourses of the Buddha. But you treat those books as objects of reverence. But it should also mean that you study them, you read them and study them. The convention in Buddhist countries, they have the library. I think we even have it here. And there's a bookcase with a lock and key, and the sacred scriptures are kept locked up. And if you want to get a sacred scripture, so you go to the abbot, oh, can I borrow this book? And he says, oh, you have to go to the librarian who's in that room. You go to the librarian, he'll say, well, nobody has asked for that book in 20 years. I don't even know where the keys are anymore. Yeah, so people will come and they'll bow down to the books, but heaven forbid they open the book to study them. So you study the books, that's part of reverence, is to learn the Dhamma. But you treat them with a certain respect. You don't put secular books on top of them, and you keep them in a privileged place on your bookcase. And then there are ways of showing respect. So we do bowing down, either full bow or half bow, Anjali, which is joining the palms like this. Pradakshina is circling sacred objects, like when you come to a stupa, one will do a circumambulation, keeping it to one's right side. And then there's praise, recitation, recollection, meditation on the triple gem, and so forth. And then the counterpart of reverence is humility. And this is the opposite of conceit. And in a sense, like with reverence, you place your highest ideals above you, and you place yourself below them, and you look up to them. So that's an expression of humility, which is the opposite of conceit. Conceit is where you put yourself above others and above even spiritual teachers, spiritual guides, thinking, I am the best, I am number one. And then the text mentions some of the bases on which conceit can arise. In Indian society, social class, so the Brahmins think, I'm a Brahmin, I'm the best. The Kshatriyas think, we are better than the Brahmins, we are the governing and ruling class. Here in this country, we have the millionaires, billionaires think they are superior because of their wealth. Race, so we have now in this country, or in the Western world, white supremacy, but there can be conceit based on other races. It's just that white supremacy is one manifestation of racism. Nationality, we're Americans, so we can control the world. No, the French are the best. The Americans are rather uncouth, uncivilized. Beauty, so you're beautiful, handsome. Wealth, education, I'm a PhD. I have to say something. When I went to university, to graduate school, my professors always called themselves Mr., though they have PhD from Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, but always like Mr. Lauch, Mr. Erickson. But now I notice the only people that I see calling themselves with doctor, apart from people in the medical profession or psychologists, psychiatrists, are Buddhist monks who get PhDs. So you have Venerable Dr. So-and-so, right? Okay, so that's education. I don't know if I should have said that. Excuse me?
I said it's a statement of fact.
Yeah. Okay. Business success. So many, many grounds of conceit. We don't have to go into the details here, but one of the ways to overcome conceit actually, we won't go into this, but there are various ways to overcome conceit. The most effective way, actually, is by using the reflection of non-self, anatta. So one does this kind of contemplation, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. And when you really get that sense of non-self deeply ingrained in the mind, no reason to pride yourself on whatever PhD or D.Lit or any kind of external achievement that you have, but it's just washes off the way water washes off the back of a duck. Okay, I think we could take some questions. I'll leave the other virtues for tomorrow's session. So please. And I have to always bear in mind that I'm going to stop the share so I can see the people who might have online who might have questions. And so first I'll give priority to people who are in the hall. Okay. Again, your name was?
Evan. Evan.
Evan,
Yeah.
okay.
Could you pull up the document again, just that to defeat conceit? I actually.
The document that I just had?
Yeah. Because I find self-identity is like the most reinforced thing I have, and it's the hardest to kind of. So, I'd like to see what you collected from the.
Which portion?
Yeah, right, how to overcome conceit and develop humility.
How to overcome
Yeah,
conceit.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I have actually here the reflection on non-self, that this is not mine, this I am not, that is my body, my feelings, my ideas.
Yeah,
Right.
no, just to me personally, it always seems like the first fetter, like, we take up as children, and it's like the last one that gets gotten rid of. So
Yeah, conceit is actually
it's
towards the...
so insidious.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. The subtle conceit gets eradicated at a very late stage, but this will help to overcome the coarser manifestations of conceit.
Okay, yeah, that's it. That's all I wanted. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we can take over here.
Thank you, Bante. My name is Yus. I want to ask about the daily recollections, which I usually do about death. In particular, I heard another monk say at the time of death, you want to go with a clear mind.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? Like a clear mind, like do I start chanting Bhutto or do I do mindfulness of breathing? And like I'm very concerned about approaching death. Not
Yeah,
that I'm not terminally ill or anything, but I want to know what should I be when I'm approaching death and I know that it's coming.
Yeah, okay, to have a clear mind means that you want to try to preserve like mindfulness and clear comprehension at the time of death. Whether you want to focus on a particular meditation subject or just simply to observe the process of dying with mindfulness and clear comprehension, there's no fixed rule about that. The Buddha does say that for those who have deeply practiced the mindfulness of breathing, even the last in-breath and out-breath will be observed with mindfulness. But a lot of people, maybe that's a very difficult achievement, so a lot of people do the recollection of the Buddha, which I'm going to teach, and so you bear in mind the Buddha or the qualities of the Buddha as what is approaching death. And that creates a joyful, wholesome, uplifting sense of mind so you can pass away peacefully. In the late 1970s, no, it was actually the middle 1970s, when I was in Sri Lanka, I spent some time in the hospital in Colombo helping. There was a monk who had the Buddha's hospital service, and I noticed that people who were seriously ill, they would have like a nice picture of the Buddha by the side of their bed in the hospital, so they could focus on that image of the Buddha in case they enter the death stage.
Thank you.
Okay, let us see then. Yeah, I don't see any other hands here, so let us see if we have any people online with questions. So I just see one. This is Samangi Munasingha.
Yes, Bante, thank you very much for your teachings.
Let me just get the earphone. Okay, you can go now.
I have a question about merit and that you talked about this morning, and so if I'm doing something meritorious, say good, feeding a hungry person or something like that, should we be thinking about, because you said in the morning the Buddha said, don't disregard the merit that you can have. Should we be thinking about the merit we are getting, or should we just be happy that that person? I feel like if I think more myself and my merit, then it's kind of an ulterior motive rather than feeding this hungry person.
Yeah, okay, that's a good question.
Thank you.
And what I find to be interesting is that the Buddha teaches people at different sort of stages of spiritual development and with people with different inclinations and aptitudes. So to encourage, say, a person who's been habitually involved with unwholesome actions, he will point out the beneficial fruits or results that come from meritorious deeds as a way for them to encourage them to engage in meritorious actions. So as I mentioned this morning, so he'll say that through meritorious deeds, that creates the causes and conditions for a long lifespan, if not in this life, in future lives, good health, wholesome relationships, good opportunities for employment, education, physical beauty, and so forth. So a person who is sort of strongly inclined towards the unwholesome will engage in, might then be encouraged to engage in wholesome actions with the idea that they'll reap these worldly benefits. So there's a kind of clinging and grasping that underlies that, but at least it's pulling them away from the unwholesome and moving them in the direction of the wholesome. Okay, for somebody at a higher level of spiritual development, one would engage in the wholesome activities, the meritorious activities, and one recognizes the working of the law of karma. So one doesn't disregard it, but one performs the meritorious actions or the wholesome actions simply for their own sake, because they bring a kind of inner joy to the mind, an upliftment to the mind. And in the case of actions that alleviate the suffering of others, because you can realize that you are doing things to help and to benefit others. And then you just let the process of karma and its fruit take care of itself, but you don't have to sort of deliberately pursue the beneficial results of meritorious action.
Thank
Does
you
that
very
make
much for
sense?
clarifying. Thank you very much for clarifying. It's really helpful.
Okay, and so I see another hand from the people online. This is Vandana.
Yes, Bhante.
Okay, let me just put these earphones. Okay, go ahead.
I have a question about the dedicating merit to the deceased one, the people who had died. So I heard from the Thai Ajahn that they won't be able to receive any merits from you because they are in a different realm. So you can just do it for your own sake, that you will be happy to do it. Otherwise, if they receive it or not, is not guaranteed unless they're looking for it. Maybe they're already in the heavens or somewhere. So, so I was, I was just wondering about that. Can you please clarify?
Okay, okay. Oops. Okay, so I can't speak from first-hand experience about this, since I'm still alive, so I don't know if I'll receive the merits of other people. Okay, so my understanding, I think maybe you misunderstood a little thing about what the Thai Achan said. There are certain realms in which the beings can receive, when you dedicate merit to them, where they can receive the merit. And there's not actually a transference of merit, but what takes place, that there are certain beings in invisible realms who, these would be usually, most often, people who have had some relation to ourselves, deceased relatives or friends, but it could also maybe be other beings. So one is the beings in the realm of the pretas, the afflicted spirits, sometimes called the hungry ghosts. And so when you dedicate the merit to them, they are able to witness the mind state by which you dedicate the merit, and then they can rejoice, and it will help alleviate their affliction in the realm of the tormented, the afflicted spirits. And the other, I think, are the lower devas, not the devas in the highest heavenly realms, but these are devas who have a close association with the earth. So they're still sort of hovering around the earth in an invisible realm. And so when we dedicate the merit to them, they can witness it and rejoice in it, and in that way they participate in the merit. In fact, there is a verse, it comes in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, where there are two ministers of the state of Magadha. They invite the Buddha and the monks to come for an alms offering. And then the Buddha, after the alms offering, the meal offering, the Buddha says that when you do a deed of merit, you should dedicate the merit to the Devas. And then the Devas, having rejoiced in the merit that you share with them, will have compassion on you and protect you. You can look, it's in the early part of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta.
Thank you.
Nida and Vasikara, those are the two ministers of Magadha who invite the Buddha for a meal at Pataligama, when the Buddha is at Pataligama. Okay, Okay, we'll take one more. Did you have a question? Okay, if it's a simple one.
We'll see. I'm Ron again. I just was looking for some guidance about the afternoon comment about generosity and providing for wife and children, giving your wife jewelry, I think it said, and I guess the balance that I'm struggling with is that it can often lead to greed and entitlement by those people, meaning rather than gratitude, wanting more. And so, I just wanted to get a comment on that.
Yeah, I don't think I really have a comment on that. Maybe you could ask some married women who have received ornaments from their husbands. Yeah, of course, it might lead to some greed, but maybe I think it will cement the relationship, in my opinion, that the husband gives some ornament to the wife, and then a necklace or some earrings or a ring or something nice, and the woman will like it, and it gives a feeling of closeness. Not necessarily, I don't think it necessarily leads to greed. Okay, I think we want to take a little break now. Let us say till 10 after 8, then we'll come back. And then I want to teach the Buddhanussati meditation. Originally I was going to do one day Buddhanussati, then Dhammanussati, recollection of the Buddha, recollection of the Dhamma, recollection of the Sangha, but that gets too scattered. So we're just going to focus on recollection of the Buddha over 3 days. So I'll explain it and then we'll practice it. Okay, but let us take a little break until, say, we'll give it 15 minutes until 8:15. We could come back. Excuse me? Oh, where to be for... Yeah, I think we could do it over there. We don't have to see... We don't have to see anything visually.
Stop recording.
Yeah, I know.